A very, very good morning to everybody who's taken out this time for us. I hope today's session would be very, very informative and it would add some value to your professional qualifications. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start. So today is the second session of the Primavera P6. In the first session, we discussed something about how to create an EPS, how to create a WBS, and some basic principles of project management. Now we are going to put some activities and schedule a project, and we'll show you how to make a project plan. Yep. So let's go forward. All right. So I'll just read through the slide and then we'll explain you one by one. Activities, WBS, and scheduling levels. So basically, first of all, you need to learn how to add new activities and how to make an activity network into the WBS and on the project level. In the activity network, select the group band or another activity box within the group band into which you want to add the new activity. Then click on the edit toolbar or choose edit add. I think our session is being recorded. Just wanted to check if it's recording. All right, it's recording on my computer. Thank you so much. All right, so basically what it says is in the activity network, you have to select a group band or another activity box within the group band into which you want to add a new activity. Then click on the edit toolbar and choose the edit add. Okay, I'll show you in Primavera how we actually do it. Yeah, fine. So let's say this is one of our project named new project. We're deleting the existing set of activities and we'll make sure there are some WBSs as well in this project so that we are able to show you something on how to add activities within a WBS. Civil, that's the first one. Second one is mechanical. Third one is electrical. All right, so as explained in the previous session, we have added some of the core WBSs. Now let's start adding some activities into these WBSs. Let me refresh the data. Yeah, I think we haven't sorted and we've hidden the empty WBSs. That's why Primavera is not showing us empty WBSs. All right, so here we go. We've got all the WBSs. Now let's start adding the activities. There are two ways to add an activity. Here's the plus symbol. You can add the activities from here, and then it will ask you for the activity ID. Let us keep this intact. We don't need to change it. Now let's name the activity as excavation for foundation. Yep. All right, so here you've got a new activity. We'll select it as task dependent. We are not assigning any resources. Let's keep it in all the, let's keep it as it is. Don't change anything. Here you've got the first activity assigned. Let's add activities one after the other. We can press the insert key. Just shortcut to enter the activities as press the insert key, tab, press another insert key, tab, press another insert key, and that's how you'll be adding several activities as there is the need to add. Let's say Let's name it as PCC. Yep, standard. Yeah, for all the civil engineers. Rebar. Yeah, formwork. Yep, and here you've got concrete. Wow, so we've added the number of activities that are required in civil. Similarly, we can add activities here into the new WBS. All right, so I'll just add one activity to show that we can how to add activity within the project. So basically, in order to add an activity to the project, you don't need to select a WBS. Select the project name and just select add. So here we can write commencement of project. That's an activity, but the type of this activity would be start milestone. It won't be a task because this is a milestone, right? You're commencing the project on a certain day. Let's say this day is 1st of January. You can go back and change the date here. January the 1st. Yep. 1st January would be a Sunday. So it's not taking it because it is not in the calendar. It is taking the date after that, which is just 2nd of January. Look, we've assigned a date to this. Excavation for foundation, PCC, rebar, formwork, concrete. So are you able to see how you add activities? Just, I'll show you the shortcut. The simplest way is to just do a right click and add. Yeah.
Yeah.
All good. Okay, cool. So let's go on to the next sentence. Activity types. As we saw, there are 5 types of activities. Start milestones, finish milestone, task dependent, resource dependent, WBS level. I'm sorry, there are not 5 types, there's 6 types. And the level of effort. Mostly we would be using only 3 types of activities. One is the start milestone, other one is the finish milestone, and the task dependent. We rarely use level of effort, WBS summary, and resource dependent. But yeah, we'll go into the nitty-gritty of those things when we do the relationships, and I think there we'll be taking this in much more detail. Uh, let's do something about the 3 scheduling levels. So basically, what do you mean by scheduling levels? These are basically levels of a plan, of a schedule, which you need to make for a certain group of people. If you're making it for the XCOM, that's the executive committee, you'll be preparing level 1. That's your executive summary, which is also called project master schedule. If you are uh, giving a set of people a summary of the entire project wherein you are closing on the WBSs as well, I would say project managers would be interested in level 2. um, Level 3 is basically when you go into the depth of the WBSs and start adding some critical activities, wherein you can make sure that you are able to give the management the critical path. At that point of time, you can say you've prepared a level 3 schedule. Level 4 is basically it's a standard schedule which most of the contractor companies they make, like for a 5-year, 7-year project. This is a very standard schedule level that is being developed uh, during the initiation of the project, during the planning phase. Level 5 is basically a short-term schedule used to map out the detailed tasks. So if you say, I mean, there are 3-month rolling programs, there are 4-week rolling programs. So all these look aheads, as you would say, are basically the L5 schedules. You go into all the nitty-gritties of all the activities, and sometimes some projects they are even assigning resources to the level 5 in order to derivate a cost from from the progress that they're monitoring on regular basis. So that's about it. I would like Jala to just intervene and say something more about the scheduling levels if I have missed something.
Yeah, yes. See, mostly we'll consider the same one, and whatever the set of WBS is we are creating in Primavera, it will be going to be considering as the levels like root projects. We considering the first level, and whatever the number of sub WBS and hierarchy of WBS we are going to create, it will be considering as level 2, level 3, or level 4. And whenever we have a set of activities in that particular set of WBS at bottom level, at where we can add a set of resources to making a posting. Mostly, it's a finest uh, bottom of set of activity as work packages. Rest things is very well explained by Giris. So we'll move for the scheduling or relationships.
Okay, thank you, Jala. Let's go on to the next one. So relationships, logic, lead, and lag. So I'm going to read a very, very important paragraph here, and then I'll be explaining this in detail. There are two major types of logic to understand how to define relationships. The first type is related to the relationship of activities, and the second type works by imposing constraints on the activities. You have to identify the type of logic to be followed. There are types of dependencies like mandatory dependency, discretionary dependency, internal dependency, and external dependency based on which relationships are defined between activities. All right, so what it says is, whenever you apply a relationship or apply a logic to the set of activities that you just created in Primavera, the most important thing that you do is you need to weigh, uh, what needs to be done. Like a if it is a milestone which is as per the contract, which is required as per the to fulfill the contract obligations, you would be required to put constraints on it rather than relationships, because you need to make sure that these dates are tight, these dates are not moving from their respective plan. And in order to do that, it's better to apply a constraint to these dates. Of course, there would be a relationship that would lead to the finish milestone, but generally to the start milestone, there is no relationship. Like, if you see a project access date, like project access date, there is no starting, I mean, there's no relationship to it, it's the starting point. So most of the starting milestones, like, access date of a particular area, uh, they would be having a constraint, they won't be having any relationships. Yeah. Okay, fine. So when we talk about the dependencies, let's see one by one what these dependencies actually mean in a real life scenario. The mandatory dependencies are the ones which are the contract obligations. Discretionary dependencies, as the name suggests, are uh, discretionary, like, these are dependent on external factors, and it's on the discretion of the management whether to take such external dependencies or not into consideration while making a plan. All the internal dependencies are basically your internal set of interfaces, or your interfaces between your subcontractors that you're having. Like, somebody a particular set of subcontractor is going to do excavation and digging and trenching, uh, another contractor is going to do the foundation work. So there's an interface between the two, and so the relationships between these two activities, excavation or trenching, and uh, your foundation, is basically going to be uh, it's going to be an internal dependency. So, depending on the type of a dependency that you have in the project, you will either assign the relationship of activities on finish to finish, finish to start, start to finish, and start to start. So basically, out of the four relationships that we have, we use only the three common ones, which is finish to start to start, and finish to finish. We don't use start to finish because uh, there are rarely any activities which come in across that set of a, activity relationship. So yeah, that's almost everything about the relationships. Let's talk about predecessors. So what's a predecessor? A predecessor is an activity that precedes another activity. So for example, let's take concreting. So before concreting, you'd be doing formwork and reinforcement. And formwork and reinforcement would be basically the predecessors for concreting. And similarly, a successor is an activity that follows another activity. So removal of formwork is going to be a successor of concreting, or curing of concrete is going to be the successor of concreting. So you know what I mean. I mean, it's very simple to understand. Uh,
Mm.
I think I'll just ask Jhala to explain lead and lag, because there is this is very important in a project, and I think Jhala, I mean, it's over to you. Please
Yeah.
explain this to them.
Shall we do it in Primavera?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. So let's apply a relationship and then see how lead and lag works. Yeah. All right. So here is a set of activities. Let's explain them everything with a set of civil activities. Civil is my field, so I am a bit
Yeah.
comfortable with it. Yeah.
See, guys, we have a three methods to applying a relationship in a Primavera. First and most important method, we say it's a PDM, predecessor diagrammic method. In that, we have to follow the predecessor of each and every activity to applying a relation. Like we have a milestone in a first activity, and there is no predecessor of that activity. So we'll start from the next one, like ask a question. Here we have option of assigning a relationship with the predecessor activity. You have to select the activity, then you have to go through the predecessor. Here you have to apply the predecessor of that activity. Second, you can even you can do it from this column is given in list of columns with a name of activities and all. You just have to select the predecessor of existing activity.
Mhm.
It may be any activity. There is no any particular sequence for that. It depends on your logic you are making for doing a
Exactly.
planning. And second, you can do the multi selection of the activity, and you may apply the link activity. Is a
Mhm.
shortcut basically for adding a list of activity in a single pattern like finish start simultaneously. And even we have an option. Sometime we are working on a huge network diagram, so we don't have a proper understanding to doing it from this column, so you can directly do it from mouse. It looks like that, but it's not that much of trustable, because somehow there is a chances of making mistakes. So better to go with the PDM method. It is
Definitely.
the best and safe one. So after putting a set
Definitely.
of activity relationship, we have to apply the schedule. So scheduling is a process of finding a critical path. We'll go on the next part. First, we'll do the whatever the lead and lagging we are using for mapping our logic in the critical path. So see, we are doing a concreting. After concreting, there is some curing time in that particular activities before starting with the mechanical. So let me add the once mechanical activity will start. Before that, we have to complete these entire civil activities. So here we are using a leg for curing. Like I'm applying a leg in the mechanical activity, because once a civil concreting got completed, we have to wait for almost 14 or 15 days
That's
to,
right.
to make it as a cure for the concreting. So whatever the idle time we will considering as a curing, or maybe it's some third party jobs which are not in our control, and that's why we are using a leg for making idle time. Here we are not using any resources to be work on their activity. And same as we have a lead. Lead is what, whenever you are feasible to start the activity without completing his predecessor, in that part you have to put the negative value in a leg. It will be considering as a lead. So mostly lead and lag is a very important aspect for mapping a relationship in a Primavera or with any PMI software. So it looks like that it's mapping over allocated, but in that condition you have a enough set of resources to optimizing both activities simultaneously. Okay, and there is a set of relations types we have in predecessor to apply. Like I can say I can apply a start plus leg. It looks similar like finish start minus lead. So it depends on the logic of program we are making during a
Yep,
scheduling. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Then somewhere we are using a finish means both activity will going to finish. There is no dependency on start. So there is a set of examples we can say like finish. Once the project got completed, we have to complete the entire housekeeping and ground clearance activities. Like start, we have to start a both activity with together. So it's all depends on the logic we are making for doing the scheduling. Okay. So this set of steps you have to follow to make a relationships in a Primavera, and each and every time, whatever the number of changes we are making in doing relations and whatever the logic we are making, we always have to make a schedule to reflecting the changes. Even we have an option for customizing relationship from this line of relation. Like the shortcut, it's very much easy to do the lagging and types of relation changes here. Okay. So further we'll continue with CPM. Yes, Girish, please continue.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Jala. Let me go to the slide back and fine. So very well explained the lead and lag by Jala. Now let's continue on to the next slide. Project scheduling, CPM and float. So guys, the whole purpose of making a program is to understand the critical path. And let's understand in depth what critical path really is. Critical path is a sequence of activities which adds up to the longest overall duration. A project can have several parallel near critical paths, right? So basically you can have 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 critical paths, doesn't matter, depending on the size of the project and the type of the project. And everybody is interested in monitoring the critical path. Uh, all other activities which are not on the critical path are not very important to the executive management, the management who is looking after the whole project. uh, it's not important to them. But yeah, in saying that, it's very important to understand the non-critical path and how you can utilize the resources in the non-critical path by not letting them sit idle and make optimum use by leveling the resources. That's going to be covered in the next session. But anyways, this is just a brief of it. Uh, so CPM is mathematically based algorithm for scheduling a set of project activities. Any project with any project with interdependent activities can apply this method of scheduling. All right, so uh, most of the PMIS tools use CPM as their uh, as their algorithm, and that's why we would speak a bit more about CPM. We'll go to Primavera and see how a critical path is is made, what makes a critical path, what is float, what is free float, what is total float, and how you can optimize the resources using the free float and the total float. uh, I will switch on to the Primavera screen, and I will hand the other part of the explanation to Jala. Jala, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Uh, we'll add a new activities, or maybe we'll take a small example to take a review of that. Whenever we are doing a planning in a project, if we have a set of WBS to we can add in a project, it's a far good to representing the sub-component of the projects, or we can say the products of the projects. And it is not required that we have to add the WBS every time. If we are doing L1 planning, then you can add a set of activity directly with the project level. Okay, and then in the second levels, we can describe in details with WBS and set of activities. So here I'm just taking a new project for just a clear example of the floats and all. We'll taking example of any mechanical activities like let me show you. Mostly we have seen that in mechanical activities, first of all, you have to work on drawings, and then after we are doing the erection jobs, and then after whatever the finalized commissioning or workshop activity we have to do.
Right.
So here, yeah. So already we have that in that example. Let me show you from here only. So see, I have already added some set of activity like we have a drawing, then we have a erection two, then we have a box up, or we can say the assembly, or we can say the commissioning, anything. So let me refresh it properly. So guys, you can see here I have applied a relationship like erection will start after the drawing, erection one will start after the drawing, erection two is also will start after the drawing, because once a drawing got completed, both erection job will start parallelly. So then after completing both erection activities, we'll start a box up activity. So obviously we have a multiple successor or multiple predecessor for the single activity. It depends on the logic and logic scenario we are making. So once you apply the schedule after adding a set of activity, whatever the critical part you are getting, and parallelly you are also getting a non-critical part. So let me show you properly from the Gantt chart. So it's a table window, it's a Gantt chart. Here we are getting a details of the entire activities and all. So here, whatever the longest duration that it will taking is a critical part, and whatever the parallel activities we are considering with the against the critical part is a non-critical. So here we have a column to visualize a float. Okay, here we are getting a free float and total float with the same activity, because there is no another non-critical activity with that continuing relationship of that activity. So here we are getting a 5 days of total float, or we can say free float. So free float is we can say a free time for that activity, and we can say free float is what we can delay the activity until it will delay the successor of that activity.
Right.
And total float means what we can delay the activity until it will delay the project finish date.
Project.
So mostly while using a constraints, we considering as a total float, but for the particular activity, or we can say the free time for that particular activity, it should be considering as a free float. Okay, so or we can say let me add one another activity so we can identify a difference between free float and total float. Here I'm removing the relationship of that box up and direction two, and I am putting a new activity here for this clearing of that total and free float. And okay, for numbering the activity, there is no option of inserting a new row between the existing. So you have to renumber it according your sequencing. So I'm putting as 21. So it will automatically appear at that level. And I'm naming it as a erection
2.1.
2.1. It will be showing us a part of it. Or you may add a new WBS to making a set of sub part of that activities. And that will put the duration as a 2 days only. Fine. So let's we link it. because it's again a part of erection 2, so we'll link with the erection 2, and then we have a linking with box up. So let's we apply the schedule.
Mm.
Right. Now you can visualize there is a two floats we are getting in a Gantt chart. So whatever activity we have in that non-critical part, it it all contains a floats. But activity which contains a free float, it's only possible for delaying, and it will not impact until it will delay to the whatever the number of days in a float. But the total float is what basically the predecessor of free float activity, and which are in non-critical, it's all as total float because it inherits a float of free float activities. So we can say there is a major difference between total float and free float. uh, Means this both activity can delay by 3 days, and in planning part, mostly we'll use a legging to hide the float. Like if I will put 3 days of the leg, that non-critical activity, it will become a critical because we have utilized the idle time in leg,
Right.
and we are showing that it's idle, and we have to mobilize the resources from here only to the next critical activity. So it is more feasible to optimizing resources properly. But in execution time, we don't have a rights to mapping a changes with or with a planning. So that's why we have to use the constraints. Okay.
Right.
So there is a two level of constraints we have. uh, Girish, please, can you explain whatever the
Yeah.
constraint, and we will come back to the.
So yeah. So basically, we'll explain you the level of constraints. The one set of constraints is meant for the whole project. So if you see, there are some start constraints and finish constraints which affect the whole project, and the other constraints are basically meant for a particular WBS. uh, yeah, so basically this is the two types of constraints, and some constraints will be very very rigid, and they will compromise the program, and we will uh, we will see that we don't use those constraints at all in our program. So basically, there are some mandatory constraints like mandatory start, mandatory finish. Uh, it is not advisable to use mandatory constraints, because then it doesn't give you a it doesn't give you the the negative float. It actually squeezes in the duration by doing a negative lead. Is that correct, Jala?
Yeah, let me show you practically how
Yeah,
it works.
so Jala will
Yes,
show that to you practically in
yeah,
how on how that works.
yes, yes. Thank you. As we discussed, mostly we have a two level of constraints. First is a project level. There is only one constraint in project level. Uh, while we are creating a project, uh, it's a good practice. We are not going to add a finish date, because once you plan in a Primavera, it will show you whatever the duration you're taking by using a critical, but it will show you the finish date. But somehow management will going to pressurize the team to complete the activity before the finish date or before the plan finish by the Primavera. Basically, it's for the schedule comparison, so we can achieve our uh, defined milestone before the date of plan finish. So here we are taking a 2 or 3 days earlier as a part of must finish by, and then we'll apply the schedule. So there is only a way to generating a negative float in the Primavera is a must finish by constraint. So means in entire project team have to complete the project before the finish date, or we can say before the 2 days of finish date. So it looks like that anyone activity have to compromise its duration for 2 days. Mostly we seen that whenever people are getting idle time in their activity, obviously they will work for this extra load, or you can say the compression of activity. So once you apply the must finish by, it will directly generating a negative float. But those who have a free float or total float, it will just reduce the that number of float. So these all people, those who are working in that non-critical part, they will mobilize to that critical activities. So definitely, once you increase the resources with the activity, it will increase the effort, and it will help to complete the activities before the time. So as a project level constraint, so mostly it's not we can say suggestible to apply the must finish by if there is the constraint of, or we can say the lack of resources. In that situation, we have idle resources with the non-critical activity, then only manager will decide to applying the must finish by, because it's undertaking a negative float. And again, as like a float is not allowable in a critical path, same as negative float is also not allowable by the management in critical path. Right. So
Yeah,
then we have
negative float is basically a virus in your program, and you need to remove negative float in in any condition. I mean, you can either reduce the duration of the activity which is causing negative float, or you can, I mean, of course, as Jala earlier told, it's not advisable to use the project level constraints, uh, like, must finish by. It's not advisable to use that constraint. I think, to be very
uh,
fair, and as per the principles of PMP, only two
mm,
constraints should be applied, which is start on, finish on. And I think these are the only two constraints that you will be applying in
yeah,
real life
and
too.
somewhere we are using as little as possible. Yeah. So
Yep.
let me show you practically how it looks while you are using a constraint during the execution. And there is a scenario of using a constraint in execution only. We cannot apply the constraint while we're doing a planning. But for the milestone activity, we can do because as per our earlier experience with our one of project, because we have to impose the dates, so we cannot we can say we cannot adhere and we cannot later against the test. We are using a constraint, so it will a good practice to applying a constraint with the milestone, so you can make a proper planning according to your management needs, or we can say contract dates. So guys, let me show you. Okay, further I just need a single float, so I will just removing this activity from here. So you have to use a dissolve. So it's a good practice because it will not remove the relationship between a successor and predecessor of whatever activity you have to delete. So we have to dissolve the activity, and it will mapping the relationship
Yep.
against the predecessor and successor. So guys, here we have a set of constraints, but mostly we'll use the uh, as a good practice, we always using of as late as possible, because once you apply the as late as possible, it will directly decide whatever the number of days of float we have, it automatically going to be delayed. Okay, sorry, I have applied on a wrong activity. So non sorry, whatever the activity level constraint we have, we only have to apply on non-critical activity. We cannot apply on a critical activity, and even it will not impact any, or it will not making any effect on critical part, because they are already critical. So only with the non-critical activity we have to use the activity level constraints. So as I applied as late as possible, so it will decide how many days it will delay before delaying the next successor of that activity. So here we have as late as possible, and mostly cases we are using as late as possible. But somewhere against the critical part, where we have to start the resources to mobilize. So if you have to complete this activity in that duration only, then you have to apply that start on, means the activity will start and finish on as per the planned time. Then the whatever the set of resources are working on that activity, it will mobilize to that critical activity. So for the resource optimization, we are using the constraints. And if we have to start this activity later by 1 or 2 days, so it's impact like that against the critical part, whatever the type of date imposition you have to do for optimizing and mobilizing resources. So again, this critical part, wherever you have to manage this non-critical activity, for mapping this, we are using a constraints. Okay. So
Okay.
mostly there is a three constraint we are using, and it is a start on, finish on, and as late as possible. Or there is one another scenario we have, like we don't have to wipe the entire floats. We just have to wipe 1 or 2 days of float, and even we have to give the 1 or 2 days of extra float. So we can completely mobilize maybe a 30 or 40% of resources from there. It is also a good practice. So in that case, we can say we are using a start on rafter but finish on or before. Means once you apply the start on or after and finish on or before, it will definitely make a critical of that activity. But if you need 1 or 2 days of float in that activity, so it's like that uh, we are mobilizing the set of resources permanently from here, and even we are giving extra time of 2 days, so people can delay activity by 2 days because we have decreased the resources from here. So these types of scenario mostly we are facing while you are playing a constraint during the execution. Okay, and it's completely based on the logics of program we are making and situation we are facing while executing the job, and it's completely dynamic. There is no any pre-plan for applying a constraints. Okay, Girish, please continue.
All right. Thank you, Jala. So I think we have finished the constraints. We have finished relationships. We finished logic, lead, lag, uh, CPM, and float. Um, okay, so basically, we'll discuss all the constraints in depth, how float can be optimized. I'll give you some practical example. As Jala has already discussed these examples earlier, I think there is no much need, but if if some of you are not able to understand, I'll still give one more try to explain it to you in much more detail. Yep. So first I'll
Yes.
read it. What is a constraint? The major types of constraints are project level and activity level, as we discussed. Constraints are only used by management if there are factors which affect either the start or the finish of a particular activity. Uh, what I would suggest to all the planners is apply a constraint on all the contract obligation dates, uh, and the inner activities or between those constraints need to be managed. Maybe you will get a negative float. No problems with getting a negative float. Most of the people and they'll explain you that negative float, if you apply constraints you'll get negative float, but that's wrong. Applying constraints on project deliverables and project dates which are mandatory contract obligations need to be done. You need to apply constraints wherever it is required. If you get negative float, there are two ways to get rid of the negative float. One is to check the logic of the activities between the start and the finish constraint, and uh, the other one is to reduce the duration. So basically that's how you can do. You can either uh, do some changes in the logic in a way that the duration is compromised. I mean the duration is lesser than what is required between two constraint dates, and the other one is to reduce the duration physically for activities where you anticipate that uh, this is the duration that uh, you can actually complete the work. So you can reduce the duration for those. So basically, yes, for most of the people, negative float is a monster, but you can take care of it if you know what you're doing. Uh, all right, so give examples of practical situations where constraints are used and what constraints are used. I think Jala has already covered that. Optimizing float, the smoothest way of float optimization is to use as late as possible, as demonstrated by Jala in P6. Primavera will delay all non-critical activities until the late finish date. So basically it will delay all the non-critical activities and make them critical. This way you can optimize your resources. You can use your resources on the one that is more critical, and maybe you'll be able to finish it faster and optimize your costs. All right. let's move further. All right, guys. Uh, we are doing a lot of effort in putting all these things together for you, and you know, regardless of you sparing 5 minutes for us or not, this is going to be a free session, free training for everyone who wants to learn more about Primavera and project controls. But I mean, we would be really motivated to do these things again and again if you provide us good ratings on social media, uh, for giving us a good reviews on Google. Just type Compass Consult Melbourne and provide us some great reviews there. Uh, we've also mentioned our YouTube link and LinkedIn link. You'll also find this link in the YouTube description box, so that you can just click on that and follow us and give us some awesome ratings. We hope you would have enjoyed the session. You would have learned everything that you wanted to. You would have understood what we tried to explain. But Primavera is not that simple, and it takes time to understand things. It takes really good amount of practice, really good number of hours to get hands on it. And that's why I would recommend each one of you to just send us an email if you've got any queries while you're doing all this on your own. We would be happy to answer your queries. Just make sure that you send us your email on info, that is info at compassconsult.com.au. Uh, I mean, that's a big thank you for us from us, and we'll take your leave. Thank you so much.